Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back. We're continuing our ongoing conversation about how this digital world is fundamentally changing, well, some of the most basic human experiences.
That's right. For months now, we've been talking about community architecture, influence, the flow of information
All
flow.
the big structural pieces.
Yeah.
But today, we're going a bit deeper, I think. We're looking at the intersection of something incredibly personal memory, grief, and the very cold optimizing logic of code.
It's such a crucial pivot in our discussion. We're really grappling with a modern dilemma here, which is the survival of our most cherished history.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think about memory, historically, we think of permanence, right? Something rooted.
You'd think of a stone monument.
Exactly. Granite memorials, heavy archives, a letter-bound family album, things that are designed to withstand time.
Right.
But the sources we've gathered for this deep dive, they illuminate this startling contrast. In the digital sphere, that same memory, that profound connection to our past, it lives entirely on what feels like rented ground.
Rented ground. I mean, that analogy is just so effective. It immediately creates this sense of profound instability, doesn't it?
It does.
It shifts the conversation away from the emotional permanence, the fact that we feel we need to remember, and it moves it over to structural impermanence.
Yes, precisely.
So the core question we're really tackling today is, it's deeply unsettling. What happens when the survival of profound personal memory, the collective history of a community, what happens when that depends entirely on whether a specific server stays powered on?
Or if a piece of legacy code is even deemed worthy of the next update.
Exactly. We're moving beyond the feeling of it and into the architecture of responsibility.
And that's the key. We are looking at sources that explore that structural reality, the asymmetry of power, and, the ethical responsibility involved when we process grief in these digital domains.
Okay.
And the central thesis here is not just sobering, it's, I think, mandatory to grasp if we want to build a better future. The sources state this very clearly. Grief does not simply disappear because individuals stop caring.
Right.
It disappears when the responsibility for maintaining the memory becomes unclear.
That is such a vital distinction. It moves the whole conversation from the emotional realm, like, oh, people just forgot, to the organizational,
To the systemic.
to we failed to build a system that could remember.
It is the structural problem.
Yeah.
It's sitting right at the ethical fault line of our time. And the thing is, people do care. Profoundly.
Of course.
Communities invest just massive amounts of emotional energy into memorialization, but that care, it's often powerless against the fundamental design of the system.
So we have to move beyond just the feelings of loss.
We have to. We have to examine the hard mechanics of digital disappearance, the mechanics that, enable that erasure. Our mission today is really to help you, the listener, understand why the responsibility for remembrance is increasingly structural.
It's mandated by platform architecture.
And by fiduciary duty, not just emotion. It doesn't just reside within the community alone anymore. Okay, so let's look at this foundation we're building on. Because if memory is borrowed, then the structure holding it up has to be, well, fundamentally conditional.
Absolutely.
Let's start with this concept of borrowed ground. The inherent fragility it implies. The sources make it so clear that memory in these digital spaces is, well, it's never guaranteed.
It's not.
It doesn't have that principle of permanence we expect from, say, a physical archive. It just exists entirely at the mercy of decisions made, far, far away from the grieving community.
In an executive boardroom 3,000 miles away.
Right. Or it could just be the consequence of a design choice written into an automatic code update schedule months ago.
This is the ultimate expression of impermanence, but it's cloaked in this guise of stability. We are culturally conditioned to believe that digital means forever,
Oh, absolutely. You upload a photo, you write a long memorial post, and you think it's fixed in amber.
But the reality of the ecosystem is relentlessly transient, and we've all seen it happen, often with no warning, no fanfare.
So give us some specifics. How does that impermanence actually manifest in the real world? What are the mechanisms of erasure?
The sources detail three primary mechanisms. The first one is the most obvious: server shutdown.
Okay.
A platform, maybe it's a niche gaming forum or a small community photo site, it's just deemed unprofitable and someone pulls the plug. The data might be, technically archived somewhere, but access is functionally gone.
So it might as well be gone.
It might as well be. Second, and this is more subtle, features are eliminated. You might have built a profound memorial using a specific tool on the platform, a chat room, a shared timeline.
Something that was really meaningful to your community.
Incredibly meaningful. And then that tool is deprecated because it doesn't align with the new monetization strategy. The memory just disappears right along with the feature, leaving behind only, broken code.
And the third one, which you mentioned, it's maybe the most insidious because it operates under this cloak of legality.
The quiet change in the terms of service.
Yeah.
The TOS, that massive contract that, let's be honest, no one ever reads.
Yeah.
It changes quietly. And it often shifts the goalposts for data retention and persistence without any public acknowledgement of the memories they are jeopardizing.
So your memorial profile, which you thought was safe, could suddenly be reclassified.
It could be reclassified as an inactive account, and now it's subject to optimization and eventually a purge, all because a lawyer updated a paragraph 6 months ago. And you agreed to it unknowingly just by logging in.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, because the consequence of all this impermanence is massive for our shared history.
It is.
It means the memory of the dead and the ongoing necessary process of the living who are trying to process their grief, all of it is suddenly subject not to human compassion,
No.
but to market forces, to optimization algorithms designed for maximal efficiency.
That is the core structural implication we have to confront. The sources really emphasize this isn't about individual maliciousness. It's not about some CEO being cruel. It's about institutional priorities. We read how years of shared history, deeply meaningful interactions, community memorials, timelines built up over a decade can just vanish, simply because a server's sunset made economic sense.
Let's unpack that phrase, economic sense. For the listener, what exactly does a platform weigh when it's deciding to erase memory?
It's a profound ethical challenge, but it's masked as simple accounting. The decision is weighed against immediate financial goals, fiduciary duty to shareholders.
So what are the hard costs?
To an accountant, keeping that old memorial forum running involves several things. There's the physical cost, electricity and cooling for the server racks. There's the labor cost of maintaining legacy software, debugging it, ensuring security patches are up to date.
Which can be significant.
Very, and crucially, there's the opportunity cost. That's the space, the labor, the bandwidth that could be repurposed for a new high-growth, high-revenue feature.
So in that calculation, the memory of the dead is treated as, what, a line item?
It's treated as a quantifiable cost center. And almost invariably, corporate optimization policies will override the preservation of human experience because human experience lacks a measurable ROI.
The moment memory becomes a cost center, it is inherently disposable in a system that's built on perpetual growth.
Exactly.
And this leads right into this paradox you mentioned earlier, the inconvenience of grief. These meaningful, almost sacred places are suddenly treated as disposable, not because the content is bad, but because the space itself becomes inconvenient to the platform's model.
The sources highlight this friction point perfectly. Grief and the sustained presence of grief, it's messy. It doesn't generate the kind of immediate high-volume clicks or viral shares that define success metrics for these platforms.
It actually slows down interaction.
It often does. Mourning is a necessary, slow human process, and it sometimes gets treated as off-topic because it doesn't fit neatly into moderation or content guidelines designed for instant, high-churn interaction.
So an algorithm that's designed to reward active content or freshness would inevitably flag a memorial space as, what, stagnant?
Precisely. Or consider the act of silence, the act of leaving a digital space untouched as a memorial.
Like a deceased player's character in a game, just standing in their favorite spot.
A perfect example. Or a deceased user's profile kept exactly as it was. This act of digital preservation, this respectful silence, is often enforced against because it did not scale within a system designed for constant, visible, measured engagement.
If the space is silent, if it isn't generating new data or encouraging new users to interact,
the system flags it as stagnant, inefficient, and prime for optimization, or pruning.
This is where we really see that difference between active cruelty and just structural neglect played out in the code itself.
Yes.
It's not that the designers hate memory.
Not at all. The disappearance of memory is not born out of maliciousness from the staff. It happens because the system is designed to move on. It prioritizes rapid growth and efficiency, anything that slows that momentum.
Like sustained grief.
Or non-monetizable memory, or long periods of respectful silence. All of it is treated as friction to be optimized away.
The failure happens at the design stage.
Exactly. The platform's initial refusal to claim responsibility for long-term stewardship sets the stage for inevitable loss. It makes it a matter of structural inevitability, not an ethical failure at the moment of erasure.
It sounds like we've built these digital homes, but they don't have basements or attics. There's no place for the things that are slow and old and sacred.
That's a profound metaphor.
Everything has to be on the perpetually sunny, active first floor.
It's so true. And if we look at the tradition of memorialization, especially in, say, East Asian thought, there's a deep understanding that maintaining the past ancestral shrines, old stones, quiet temples, it requires the ongoing dedicated labor of the living.
It's a commitment that actively resists change.
It is. Our digital world is built on a framework that actively demands change. It's architected for change, and anything that resists that inherent dynamism is eventually expelled from the system.
So let's shift our focus to the human response to this. Because when memory is on borrowed ground, communities, well, they have to step in.
They do.
And the sources describe this clear, painful asymmetry. Communities mourn, communities invest all this emotional energy, but the platforms, by controlling the code and the servers, they ultimately decide the fate of that mourning.
The community feels the loss and applies the care, but the platform holds the ultimate kill switch.
That asymmetry has to be the Achilles heel of digital community then.
It is. This imbalance means communities are perpetually vulnerable. They're relying entirely on the institutional ethics of entities, usually large public corporations, whose primary mandate is not memorialization.
It's profit, maximizing shareholder value.
Precisely. And so when those institutions focus so keenly on their quarterly metrics, fail to act or refuse to claim that structural responsibility,
The immense weight of remembrance shifts.
it shifts entirely to the community members.
And that shifted weight becomes what the sources are calling moral labor.
Yes. This is the invisible, exhausting, and completely unpaid work that community members take on when they realize the institutions are not going to provide the support for long-term remembrance.
So they do the work because, why?
They do it simply because, in the absence of a mandate or a policy, it felt fundamentally wrong to let memory dissolve just because a corporate system was designed to move on.
I think we need to spend some real time defining that term, moral labor. How is it different from other forms of labor we recognize, like emotional labor or professional labor?
That distinction is absolutely key. Professional labor is quantifiable, right?
Yeah.
It's paid, it's mandated by a contract.
Okay.
Emotional labor, in the sociological sense, is managing your own emotions to fulfill professional or social expectations. Think of a flight attendant who always has to be smiling.
Right, that's part of the job description.
But moral labor, as it's described in these sources, is neither paid nor mandated. It is purely elective. It's driven by a sense of ethical necessity. It is the labor of filling a structural ethical void.
So if the system's architecture creates a gap, a hole, where persistence and memory should be, moral labor is the community spontaneously pouring its own energy into that hole to stop it from collapsing.
That's a perfect way to put it. And what's fascinating here is the sheer creativity and dedication embedded in this voluntary moral labor. The sources give specific examples of how communities practice ethics without law.
Meaning they're applying a moral code that has no legal or contractual backing.
Exactly. They become self-appointed digital custodians, proactively defying the system's gravitational pull toward erasure.
Okay, let's detail some of these examples for the listener. What does this moral labor actually look like day to day or even year to year?
It involves several distinct practices of digital preservation. First, they hold space. They physically protect specific digital places.
Wow.
Imagine an old forum thread dedicated to a lost member. A dedicated custodian will return to it regularly, maybe weekly or monthly, just to post a small, non-substantive message.
Why would they do that?
To keep the thread active in the algorithm's eyes. To prevent it from being automatically archived or locked or deleted due to inactivity.
So they're essentially running interference on the platform's own optimization process just to keep the light on.
Exactly. This proactive preservation demands constant vigilance against automated systems. Second, in shared digital spaces, especially games or virtual worlds, the community might enforce an ethical norm of pausing progression.
Pausing progression, what does that mean?
For example, in a massive multiplayer game, a dedicated guild might decide that a fallen member's character must remain untouched, standing in the city square or their favorite tavern, even if that means the developers later mark that character model for potential deletion during a database cleanup.
So the community polices the space around that character.
They do. They refuse to let the digital environment simply move on without them.
That refusal to move forward, that's an incredibly powerful act of digital preservation. It's prioritizing meaning over function.
And third, there's the act of leaving specific digital spaces untouched. not filling them with new, optimizing content,
Resisting the urge to update things.
not updating the deceased user's profile, even if the platform pushes for the user to freshen up their data. They keep the space as a digital relic, resisting all the demands for novelty and constant renewal.
And the long-term commitment required for this kind of moral labor must be immense.
It is. They mark anniversaries, not just the 1st, but the 5th, the 10th, long after the platforms or even the majority of casual users have moved on.
Why? What does that do?
They repeat these acts of care so the memory doesn't fade. They ensure that the deceased member's name pops up in search results or in community feeds annually, reinforcing the history. This is not inefficiency, it's essential moral labor,
And it's carried out without any structural support.
often incurring huge personal time and emotional cost on the part of the custodian.
But the tragedy here, as the sources point out with real clarity, is the inevitable fragility of this labor. When remembrance depends entirely on the willingness and the stamina of volunteers, it eventually burns out. The systemic forces against it, the constant churn, the optimization updates, the silver costs, they're constant.
And this voluntary care has no structural protection. It becomes invisible labor. It's unacknowledged and unsupported by the very entities that ultimately profit from the community's existence in the first place.
It's a Sisyphean task.
It is. The moment the individual or the group stops applying that consistent moral pressure, the systems designed for perpetual growth just step in and erase the memory.
Through a simple code update.
Or a routine server sunset, or a data cleaning process.
That constant vigilance, it must lead to profound exhaustion and burnout among these dedicated custodians.
The sources drive home a painful truth here.
Yeah.
Care, and especially this kind of moral labor, it needs structure to survive time. It requires architectural commitment, not just good intentions or individual dedication. If the community is required to shoulder all the cost, financial and emotional, the memory will eventually succumb to entropy. And not because people stop caring, but because the structure was never there to support that care.
So, connecting this back to you, the listener, this is relevant beyond just grief. It shows how any essential human need, connection, support, and need for history, for permanence, is devalued and made unsustainable when it doesn't fit the platform's optimization model.
Yes.
If the moral labor doesn't scale and it isn't compensated structurally or financially, it's doomed to fail in the long run.
Yeah.
And that leaves the community hollowed out.
And the platform benefits from the community's moral labor, the stability, the history, the richness it creates, without ever paying the maintenance bill. Which brings us directly to the ethics of profit.
Okay, so we've established that platforms often benefit from a community's history, but refuse to bear the cost of preserving it. This refusal is often dressed up as this structural defense, what the sources are calling the illusion of neutrality. The platform says, we are just a platform. They try to position themselves as inert infrastructure. It sounds passive, almost like they're apologizing for the outcome.
Our hands are tied.
Right. We're just providing the rails. The community is responsible for what happens on them.
But that statement is not passive at all. It's an active, powerful, and deeply consequential position to take. By claiming to be neutral infrastructure, they are effectively choosing not to support the community's most vulnerable and essential needs.
This is that non-committal stance.
It dictates who carries the ethical weight when things become uncomfortable or expensive or complex, like maintaining years of non-monetizable memory.
Let's analyze why neutrality is a position. I mean, if you build a road, you are inherently deciding who can use it, how fast they can go, whether or not to maintain the surface. The architecture itself is a statement of values.
Exactly. When a platform's architecture prioritizes constant high-speed optimization and growth, it is inherently anti-memory. It is anti-permanence.
So the claim of neutrality is what, a smokescreen?
It allows for the easy erasure of memory under the guise of technical necessity or feature streamlining. Oh, we had to delete that forum because the legacy database was too slow. They claim non-interference, but their very architecture, by prioritizing constant efficiency, is actively interfering.
It's prioritizing erasure over persistence.
Their code is actively choosing what to keep and what to discard. It makes their neutrality a performance, not a reality.
Now, we've seen platforms try to compensate for this structural neglect sometimes, right? With these single grand gestures.
Yes, okay.
Maybe a one-off feature, a permanent digital monument dedicated to a really high-profile loss, or a temporary tribute banner. But the sources seem highly skeptical of this as a real solution.
And rightly so. The core lesson here is critical. Exceptions do not make ethics. A single monument or a grand gesture of recognition, while it matters deeply to the individuals involved.
It offers comfort.
It offers comfort and temporary validation, yes, but it utterly fails to solve the underlying systemic question of ownership and obligation. It's a palliative measure that avoids addressing the fundamental structure where memory is rented, not held.
It's the difference between planting one single tree in a desert and redesigning the entire irrigation system.
That's a perfect analogy.
The gesture is nice, but it doesn't solve the structural template problem for the next 1,000 memories that need preserving.
The sources demand that ethics must be baked into the system design, not bolted on as a public relations move after the fact. If a platform commits to memorializing one high-profile individual, but continues to delete the collective history of 100 smaller, less monetizable communities.
It hasn't solved the ethical dilemma.
No, it has merely provided an anesthetic for public consumption.
Which brings us right to the core ethical calculation of profit. This is where the tension becomes acute.
It really does.
The sources ask this directly. Is it ethical to profit substantially from communities, from their data, their engagement, their shared stories, while systematically disclaiming responsibility for their most vulnerable moments, specifically grief and remembrance?
This is the critical moral failure laid bare. The platform profits enormously from the community's history, from their active engagement, from their very social existence. Every interaction, every moment of shared history adds value to the platform's ecosystem.
Right.
Yet, when the natural consequence of that shared history arises, which is grief and the need for memorialization, the platform treats it as friction,
As a drag on efficiency.
as a cost center, as something to be actively managed out of the system.
They want the full harvest of engagement, but they refuse to pay the labor cost of maintaining the soil that produced it.
That is the perfect summary. This economic behavior is inextricably linked to the moral failure. It creates a transactional relationship.
Where the platform benefits from the community's fullness of life.
The vitality, the history that draws new users in, but refuses to bear the cost of their inevitable loss and subsequent need for memorialization. They want the cherry picking, the marketable parts of community, but not the slow, quiet, difficult parts.
And the sources, in wrestling with this, they restate these fundamental philosophical questions that every platform user, every community member really needs to internalize.
They do.
They ask, who owns remembrance when the space is rented, not held? If a community has invested its time, its emotion, its identity, which is its spiritual and social capital, into a space, who has the moral claim when the landlord decides to sell the building?
Or bulldoze the archive. And furthermore, the question shifts from simple ownership to obligation. What specific obligations exist toward the dead who can no longer speak for themselves?
And perhaps more importantly,
toward the living who remember them and rely on that archived memory for their ongoing process of healing.
these aren't just abstract philosophy questions for a seminar, are they? They're the daily tests of digital ethics.
They are.
They surface every single time something meaningful disappears because it was inconvenient to keep. They are forcing us to confront the fact that our digital lives demand far more robust structural commitment from platform builders than we currently receive.
The ethics of digital presence require platforms to admit they are not neutral custodians. They are active shapers of memory.
And once we admit they are active shapers.
We can begin to define what ethical shaping actually looks like.
So what is the path forward then? If the problem is this structural neglect, this bias toward optimization, the solution must be structural care.
And rooted in recognition, the sources introduce a defining term, a proposed solution for future platform leadership: stewardship. This is the path forward. It acknowledges the platform's power without demanding absolute ownership over the community's past.
Stewardship, I mean, that's a concept that carries significant weight, especially in traditional contexts, right?
Correct.
The steward is responsible for managing assets or land, not for their own immediate profit.
But for the benefit of future generations.
It implies management for longevity.
It fundamentally reframes the platform's role from owner and extractor to guardian. It is explicitly not ownership. It is not control over the narratives. The sources define stewardship in 3 critical, non-monetizable ways.
Okay, what are they?
First, it involves holding space without claiming it. The platform maintains the integrity and accessibility of the memory, but the community retains the emotional and narrative ownership.
So the platform is the librarian, not the author.
A great way to put it. Second, it means protecting memory without monetizing it. This is the hard part. It means creating digital spaces that are exempt from the constant churn of advertising algorithms or data extraction.
A sort of digital nature preserve.
Exactly. And finally, it demands standing alongside communities instead of positioning oneself above them as the ultimate dictatorial authority, deciding what is worthy of preservation and what is not.
So it's an active, protective commitment to maintenance that actively resists that urge to extract immediate value from sacred spaces.
It treats them not as assets, but as trust holdings.
But we have to acknowledge how difficult this is. This kind of ethical presence, this leadership, is inherently difficult and, more importantly, it's costly in a hyper-optimized world.
Where move fast and break things is still the implicit operating system for so many organizations.
Absolutely. The sources are careful not to present stewardship as some simple feel-good policy. They describe it as a commitment that involves real corporate sacrifice.
It does.
So let's detail those specific costs, because understanding the sacrifice really reveals the depth of the commitment needed. First, the financial cost.
The financial cost is significant in a scale-driven environment. It means maintaining non-monetizable features. It means maintaining server space that exists solely for historical or memorial value.
What's the ROI on that?
Well, the return on investment for keeping a 5-year-old memorial forum running with 0 new users and 0 advertising potential might be a hard 0. But the infrastructural and labor cost is real and it's ongoing. Stewardship requires budgeting for the past, not just the future.
And beyond the sheer monetary cost, the sources point out that this path rarely receives praise. It's often invisible maintenance work.
That's right.
You don't get applause for maintaining a legacy server or leaving old code untouched.
That invisibility is a major challenge. In a corporate culture that rewards visible innovation, speed, aggressive growth, the slow, quiet, foundational work of preservation is completely devalued. The reward structure is antithetical to the moral labor required.
It also costs clarity, which is a powerful and highly valued resource in corporate environments obsessed with simplification and streamlined roadmaps.
It absolutely costs clarity. It means intentionally slowing down optimization for the sake of human needs and complexity. It means admitting that not every space should be ruthlessly optimized for speed or data delivery.
It demands recognition.
It demands recognition. Admitting that not everything meaningful can be measured by traditional business metrics like engagement or daily active users. This is arguably the hardest commitment of all. It requires a company to define success outside the parameters of quarterly growth.
And if a company can't define success outside of its growth metrics, they can't practice true stewardship.
No.
They could only practice managed, delayed erasure, just waiting until the cost exceeds the public relations value.
That recognition is the core commitment. It's the acknowledgement that some things like memory, grief, community history need protection precisely because they do not convert into immediate revenue. If they are valuable to the community, they must be valuable to the steward.
The moral commitment has to be internalized.
Not just outsourced to a single, easily cut, low-priority team. The sources suggest that structural stewardship requires creating specific internal mechanisms, like a memory reserve or a dedicated non-monetized archival department that is insulated from the pressures of the core business metrics.
And if they neglect this duty, what happens when that ethical presence is absent and the platform leadership refuses to become a steward, clinging instead to that illusion of neutrality?
The sources are very clear on the structural consequences, and they go deeper than simple data loss. Memory erodes, yes, but trust erodes with it. And this is the long-term lasting damage to the platform's legitimacy.
People notice.
People notice when the places that held their lives and their profound moments of connection are treated as disposable. They notice when the platform tolerates care only as long as it doesn't interfere with growth metrics.
And that erosion of trust must have devastating long-term implications.
For the community's willingness to continue to invest its history and identity into that digital space, absolutely. The community starts building smaller, decentralized, less efficient, but owned spaces because the borrowed ground proved unreliable when it mattered most.
So the final standard for leadership, as presented by this analysis, is an active, sustained commitment to the community's humanity, even when it's unprofitable.
A commitment to stand with memory, not after it, attempting a belated PR cleanup with a single insufficient gesture.
Not above it, dictating its terms.
But alongside it, structurally supporting the moral labor of the community members. And this commitment must hold true, the sources conclude, even when the metrics fall silent.
What do you mean when the metrics fall silent?
When the memorial space generates zero measurable engagement but profound necessary meaning for the few who still visit, that silence must be protected.
So to summarize this entire deep dive, what's the central insight?
I think it's this. The true measure of a digital world is not how fast it grows, how many users it accrues, or how much data it processes. The ultimate test of its ethical structure is what it refuses to erase.
That is the ultimate test of ethical design. Moving platform behavior from a transactional relationship with the community, where memory is just engagement fodder, to one of genuine structural responsibility.
To one of genuine care. We've established that we are all standing on borrowed ground, and that ground is inherently conditional. If we are to secure our collective digital memory, we must understand the code that governs that ground.
And we
must insist that its structural commitment to permanence outweighs its temporary incentive for profit.
And for you, the learner, we'll leave you with a final provocative thought to consider this week. If a company's success metrics universally reward speed and growth, how can we, as users and as ethical stakeholders, how can we structurally incentivize the slow, expensive, and non-monetizable work of care and remembrance?
It's a hard question.
It is. Think specifically about the moral labor you have witnessed, or perhaps even performed yourself, holding a space, maintaining an old archive, or marking an anniversary that was entirely unsupported by the platform. What specific structure would have made that labor sustainable over time? We urge you to reflect on your own digital footprints and the fragility of the borrowed ground they occupy.
A difficult but important conversation, as always.
We'll continue this conversation in the next deep dive, where we'll be looking at the structural cost of knowledge. Thank you for joining us.